On summer recess, how those decisions could and probably will shape immigration and environmental policy going forward. First African-American woman takes her seat on the nation's high court today. 51-year-old was sworn in moments after Judge Stephen Breyer made his retirement official at noon today. President Biden is calling to change the Senate rules on the filibuster to codify abortion access at the federal level. This as a Florida judge blocks a law banning abortions there after 15 weeks. And later this hour, as you know, we're still months away from the midterm elections, but some, that includes me, are beginning to think about 2024. A look at who could be testing the waters for a potential run at the presidency. Plus, the NATO summit in Madrid, well, it's wrapped up with new commitments to Ukraine and a shift in focus for security threats facing the defensive alliance. But we begin tonight with two more big decisions from the Supreme Court on its final day of the session and Justice Stephen Breyer's last day on the bench. In a 5-4 ruling, the court cleared the way for the Biden administration to end the so-called Remain in Mexico policy. Now, that program was first implemented under then-President Trump, and it required asylum seekers to await their court hearings outside the United States. In a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court limited the power of the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The court found that Congress simply did not grant the EPA the power to cap carbon dioxide emissions from power plants. This decision, environmentalists said, will deliver a significant blow to the Biden administration's efforts to combat climate change. For more on the Supreme Court and the day's top political stories, Natalie Brand, Scott McFarland, and Sophia Kai. And join me now. Natalie is a Washington-based reporter for CBS News. Scott, as you well know, is a congressional correspondent for CBS News. And Sophia is a congressional reporter for Axios. Natalie, Justice Stephen Breyer, now officially retired. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, now officially on the bench after being sworn in. Today's rulings were announced. What is their impact likely to be, and a little bit more maybe on the rulings themselves?
Hi, Major. This was such a historic day for the U.S. Supreme Court with the swearing-in ceremony after such a divisive blockbuster term for the current court. But let's start with now Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who, of course, not only becomes the nation's first Black woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court, but she also brings the interesting and unique perspective of being a former federal public defender and also a working mother. I spoke today to the dean of Howard University School of Law, who says she believes that Justice Jackson will be labeled as one of the justices who is the conscience of the court, who can speak to the challenges of the everyday person. And while the ideological makeup of this court will not change, the current 6-3 conservative majority split, we know that the impact that a justice brings through their experience and their background can make a difference. How the justices interact with each other can shape decisions on big cases and also some of the lesser known cases, but those that still have a big impact on people's lives. So that is what everyone will be watching for next term as the High Court prepares to take up more hot-button divisive issues from voting rights to affirmative action next term, Major.
Sophia, as you well know, immigration grabs headlines, generates near constant debate in this country. Break down the ramifications of today's ruling on Remain in Mexico.
Right, Major. So this came as a bit of a surprise for the administration in some ways, considering the other legal battles that it's lost. But what it means is that it can now end this policy which forces asylum seekers to remain in Mexico when they're waiting their court cases. And the Department of Homeland Security described this as bringing a slim semblance of sanity in this moment. And it also means that Biden is able to follow through on one of his campaign promises to end the Remain in Mexico policy. But another reality is that there is still a buildup of migrants trying to cross the border, and that'll be another issue that Republicans, both on the campaign trail and in Congress, will be trying to attack the administration on.
Natalie, tell us about this Florida judge who has blocked a state law banning abortions after 15 weeks. The significance?
Yeah, so the state's Florida's supposed ban, 15-week ban on abortion was supposed to take effect tomorrow. But after a hearing held earlier this week, a Florida judge has now put a temporary hold on that from taking effect. And this kind of follows the strategy that we're seeing right now in the wake of the huge ruling that overturned Roe versus Wade, of individual state level challenges that are putting temporary injunctions or pausing temporarily some of these abortion bans or trigger laws in conservative states that are trying to implement them. So the significance here is that for the time being, it looks like the current rules in Florida, which allows abortion up to 24 weeks, will continue. And really at the heart of this case was the groups challenging the new ban, saying that it is at odds with the Florida state constitution and the privacy provisions within the state's constitution. And that's an argument that we're also hearing in some of these challenges. And when you look at Florida, as CBS News has reported, we are seeing a number of women from other southeastern states with restrictions in place traveling to Florida to try to seek services. So this is an interesting state to watch. And again, we'll have to wait and see what the ultimate outcome is of some of these state legal challenges that are still working their way through the system. Ultimately, this one will likely go to the Florida Supreme Court, Major.
So many things shifting, so many ramifications after the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Scott, to you. So on the surface, the Supreme Court's decision against the EPA seems to be a blow to President Biden's stated goal of fighting climate change as aggressively as he can, using all of his regulatory powers. What does it mean for the White House politically? And if anything, what are progressives saying about it?
Well, major progressives and congressional Democrats are pretty clear. They're disappointed. What's much less clear is what in the world they're going to do about it. The Congressional Progressive Caucus issued a statement today calling this Supreme Court ruling catastrophic, but they've also been pushing for executive action on ending fossil fuel subsidies and executive orders to reduce new leases for fossil fuels. Right now, anything that limits availability of fossil fuels threatens to further raise gas prices, which in this cycle, this election year, is political kryptonite. So the next step is far from clear. We also heard from the Senate Majority Leader, who said this was a dangerous, misguided ruling from the court. The Democratic chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee in the House also criticized it. But there aren't 50 votes, much less 60 votes, for new legislation to address fossil fuel usage, energy policy, the climate crisis. The Congress has shown itself unable to muster a majority vote in the Senate on bold climate change legislation, much less the filibuster-proof 60. So, yes, there's consistent outrage from liberals, congressional Democrats. There's just no path forward of what to do next.
So President Biden wrapped up the NATO summit in Madrid today, but not without weighing in on some domestic political matters, including answering a question about whether he favored, and he said he did, doing away with the Senate's filibuster powers if it meant creating a way to create federal protections for Roe versus Wade. Let's take a listen.
The most important thing to be clear about is we have to change. I believe we have to codify Roe v. Wade in the law, and the way to do that is to make sure the Congress votes to do that. And if the filibuster gets in the way, it's like voting rights. It should be, we provide an exception for this, require an exception to the filibuster for this action to deal with the Supreme Court decision.
Sophie, I'm going to get to you in a minute, but Natalie, I need to say goodbye to you because I know you have other important work to do. So, Sophie, what are you hearing about the realistic chances, and we must emphasize realistic chances, that there can be any so-called carve-out in the Senate filibuster rules, even for abortion?
You're right, Major. There's virtually no realistic chance that this could happen. And here's why. It's because both these two Democratic senators Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten Sinema, have not changed their position about preserving the filibuster in light of both the ruling and in light of Biden's new stance on his support of the carve-out. And to be clear, they are both opposed to gutting the filibuster on any issue, including reproductive rights. So Biden doesn't even have 50 Democratic votes, not to mention the 10 Republican votes he would also have to pass a 50-50 Congress. And as an indication of just how unlikely this is, a top Democratic senator, Senator Durbin, said today when he was asked about it at a gaggle, he had said, "You know the numbers," and this is a quote, and it's an indication of just how perilous our control of Congress is.
So, January 6th committee member Adam Kinzinger is one of two on that panel, was on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert last night, and he discussed what part of the hearings he has found most disconcerting.
I am frustrated that, for instance, Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino have refused to come in and talk to Congress. We have the power of subpoena similar to what a court has, and the Justice Department has failed to indict them for that. And so all it does is send a message. You just have to resist the Select Committee, and you may be able to resist all penalties.
Scott, you're all over this story. What sense do you have that Congress will ask or lean or in some way importune or suggest to the Justice Department that it do more to help the committee get its business done to its satisfaction?
Oh, we ask the committee members that question every day unequivocally, Major. We're going to keep asking that question. We spoke to Jamie Raskin yesterday, and he responded that the committee's mission is to investigate how this happened, why it happened, how to prevent it in the future, to do a 360-degree review, not to make a specific criminal referral. But we also spoke to one of the committee's former investigators, who also happens to be a former member of Congress, Denver Riggleman, and asked him that same question. Take a listen. Are they trying to land some of this message directly with the Justice Department?
Of course they are. And I think once there's pure sort of data sharing between the DOJ and Congress, I think you're going to see an expansion of this investigation. Once Congress wraps up, I would hope that they're starting to share data now, but they're talking directly to the DOJ. And by the way, what is a fact right now, Scott, if I may lean forward a little bit? The fact is that President Trump's judgment has been called into question on a level we've never seen, I think, for another president since Nixon.
So here's two things we can say with certainty. We know in their court filings, this committee has used the language of the Justice Department. They have already accused former President Trump of obstructing an official proceeding. Kind of a weird term. That's the federal charge they've used in dozens of Capitol riot cases. But also, the Justice Department is watching. They're listening. They're monitoring. A criminal referral might be redundant. Major.
Scott and Sophia, lots of questions, lots of information, and we thank you. A significant Supreme Court session has come to an end. Our own Jan Crawford joins me to break down some of the High Court's most recent decisions, their big ones, and what enormous, possibly really big cases are on the horizon. Plus, Trump critic turned ally Ambassador Nikki Haley's speech in Iowa is raising some talk of a possible presidential run. Why some Republicans, previously more deferential to former President Trump, are, well, they're politically stepping out just a bit more boldly. More on that. You're streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year.
I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like,
wow! Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there are hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We
God. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
The Supreme Court welcomed its newest justice today, with Ketanji Brown Jackson officially taking over for retiring Justice Stephen Breyer. Jackson becomes the 116th justice to serve on the Supreme Court, and importantly, the first black woman ever to do so. All 8 other justices, including Chief Justice John Roberts, were on hand for the swearing-in ceremony, and it was Justice Breyer who swore her in. For more, I am joined by CBS News Chief Legal Correspondent Jan Crawford. Jan, lots to get to on the court, but just first, this moment of history. Let's talk about it for a second.
I mean, historic day. The first black female justice ever in the court's history. She is the 104th Associate Justice. And, you know, she comes to that court being, obviously, from the beginning, President Biden's first choice. She's got these stellar legal and academic credentials, graduate of Harvard Law School. She clerked for Justice Breyer. So, you know, it was kind of nice that he was able to swear her in with that second judicial oath today. And then she's going to get right to work. I mean, that's why they had to do this so quickly. I mean, she can't even get email until she's sworn into the court. She can't even access the systems. And let me tell you, Major, a major term is ahead for her when she really joins the court on the bench for the first time in October.
Jan, as you know, the Supreme Court often grabs headlines, but I can't remember a week or 2 weeks where it has grabbed so many headlines and it felt like its decisions were so consequential. What kind of a court is Justice Jackson about to join?
This is a court, Major, that is firmly turned to the right. And we saw it in the last 2 weeks. It could not be any clearer on matters from constitutional law to interpreting federal statutes. You know, in case after case, starting with that landmark decision, Blockbuster, overturning the 49-year-old Roe versus Wade, which said that women had a right to an abortion. The court said, no, that's not in the Constitution. It's not specifically there. The states can ban it if they want to. And then in other cases this week and last week, whether it was school prayer or guns or today, climate change and immigration, we saw this court saying the Supreme Court is not going to get involved in these policy disputes. If it's not clearly written in the Constitution, then states, you can do what you wish, and I'm generalizing here. And if it's not in the federal laws, because Congress hasn't gotten around to like rewriting 40, 50-year-old laws, then the administrative agencies can't just jump in there and you know, kind of set their own policies. This is a Supreme Court that's saying if things aren't working as a policy matter, it's not the role of the judges to jump in and fill those vacuums. So that's going to be big changes going forward, and we'll see it again next year.
To that point, Jan, the court had 2 decisions handed down this morning. Tell us about what the court said is the rationale for ending the so-called Remain in Mexico policy.
This was a policy that President Trump put into place for asylum seekers trying to enter the U.S. By land from the southern border. And immigration law gives presidents 2 options. It says that you can detain them in the U.S. While their proceedings are playing out, or you can have them remain in the state where they, you know, kind of by land. Here it was Mexico. President Trump really for the first time kind of shifted the law and picked that remain option. President Biden's been trying to unwind that and abandon that option. Lower court said he had gone about that the wrong way. The Supreme Court said the law allows the president to make the decisions. This is a controversy because Congress hasn't provided the resources for these asylum seekers to be detained in the U.S., and the president has made a policy choice that if they can't detain them because of Congress hasn't provided the resources, then they can be released in the U.S. and attend hearings with these proceedings play out. So this is, again, an example of the courts, and as Justice Kavanaugh wrote in a concurring opinion, we are not there to settle political stalemates or make policy decisions. The courts are there to interpret the law.
And you talked about the limitations being imposed by this court on the administrative structure of the executive branch. The court also curbed the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to regulate greenhouse gases coming from power plants. Who brought the case, and is the White House saying anything about its ramifications?
Yeah, I mean, the White House is very disappointed in this ruling, as are environmentalists and people who closely follow these issues, because EPA was asserting some pretty broad power here with a series of new measures that would regulate and involve some trade-offs on emissions from existing power plants. But again, I mean, the court said, well, look, this is not really in the 1970 Clean Air Act, and Congress needs to be more clear on what the EPA has authority to regulate here. And the court didn't say this, but obviously climate change wasn't really an issue in 1970. So again, putting the ball in Congress's court and saying you have to be more clear. Administrative agencies cannot usurp Congress's lawmaking power, jump in and try to figure out what these policies are going to be when there are major new questions of policy. And so this, again, puts it back to Congress, and, you know, we'll see what Congress is going to do about it. But I don't think they're going to stop with the EPA. We're talking other administrative agencies as well. Now, this case, the court really could have swung for the fences in this case, and it didn't, so the decision could have been more broad. But the court is clearly signaling that administrative agencies cannot just jump in here when there's new or potentially new major questions, that Congress has got to be clear on what it wants.
Jan, looking to the next term, the court said it will hear a North Carolina case that I've read many analysts today saying could have significant impact on future elections. What's at stake here?
It will have potentially significant impact on future elections. This is a new theory that state legislatures get under the words of the Constitution. So if you're reading the text of the Constitution, it gives state legislatures the authority to regulate the time, place, and manner of elections, and that includes elections for Senate, and the House of Representatives. So it would also have an impact on federal elections. And it also would limit the role of the state courts, since the legislatures would have this power to jump in and say something doesn't really jive with the state constitution. So, I mean, this could really affect, political gerrymandering, other kind of election procedures that a state court judge might think violate the state constitution. What it does not do, though, Major, and I think we have to be really clear on this, is it's not saying that states can kind of fiddle around with electors and submitting different electors after an election, a presidential election, as we saw kind of attempted, of course, on January 6th. The Constitution gives Congress that role. So it doesn't have that impact, but on everything else, major case. And this is not the only one. I mean, you could say this one isn't even as big as some of the other cases that they've already decided to do. It's going to be a blockbuster term next year. Cases on affirmative action in college admissions, another big voting rights case from Alabama. We've got a case involving gay rights. And they've just started taking cases. They'll continue to take them as the year goes on. All of these divisive issues, and our new Justice Ketanji Jackson, stepping right into it.
Jan Crawford breaking it down with the specifics, the context, and the history. We thank you as always.
Thanks, Major.
Former South Carolina governor and Trump administration UN ambassador Nikki Haley is making the rounds in the critical battleground state of Iowa, which naturally is sparking speculation about her political ambitions. We will talk 2024 and the likely issues driving the midterms and beyond. Plus, Israel dissolves its parliament after its ruling coalition collapses, when elections will be held, and who the potential frontrunners will be. You're streaming CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year. I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow.
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's going to bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history. The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view. Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Here's a look at some of our top stories. President Biden wrapped up his time at the NATO summit in Madrid, and he expressed a commitment to back Ukraine with additional U.S. military assistance. And NATO vowed to close ranks against China, marking the first time the defensive alliance has called out Beijing as a shared security challenge. After the testimony of former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson, the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol has subpoenaed former White House counsel Pat Cipollone. Hutchinson testified that Cipollone warned her that if former President Trump went to the Capitol to interrupt the certification of the presidential election, the president and possibly others would be legally exposed to, quote, every crime imaginable, unquote. The Supreme Court wrapped up its latest session with two significant decisions. One allows the Biden administration to end the Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy, a policy which deported asylum seekers out of the U.S. as they awaited hearings. The other ruled that the Environmental Protection Agency does not have the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants, dealing a blow, environmentalists say, to the Biden administration's fight against climate change. Nikki Haley is in Iowa this week, making stops at several campaign and fundraising events. The former UN ambassador and Republican governor from South Carolina told the Quad City Times, quote, if we, by that I think she means Republicans, don't win 2022, there's no 2024. Her appearance is inevitably raising questions about whether or not Nikki Haley might launch a bid for the White House. Now, she has said previously she would not do this if former President Trump decided to run again. For more on all of this, I'm joined by Joel Payne and Kevin Sheridan. Joel is a CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist. Kevin is a Republican strategist and former communications director for former House Speaker Paul Ryan. Joel, let me start with you. So, Iowa, that puts you on a list. If you're a Republican, might you run for president or not? So, break that down. And also, again, the questions about President Biden running for re-election. If so, what's he running on? Break it down.
Well, look, Nikki Haley joins the exclusive club of people who look in the mirror every morning and see a president, right? So I'm sure she will not be the last. And there will be many folks going through the cornfields of Iowa. Look, I think the footsteps of 2024 are upon us. They're coming up. I think the second part of your question is about President Biden. And Major, I was on with you about 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And I think what I said then, and I'm going to say the same thing now, the answer is yes until it's no. President Biden is going to run for re-election until it's no. And I guess the way I kind of square that answer is there is no way that the answer is maybe or any kind of waffle until it's absolutely no. If the president decided to make that decision, It would change the entire political prospects of the Democratic Party. Vice President Harris would become the front runner, but it would also unleash the gates of others in the party who would be interested in running. All those things are on hold right now because President Biden has declared and has said that he is making all intentions to run. I will say, the more the president kind of dithers and struggles, I think the more those whispers become louder and louder.
So, Kevin, Nikki Haley is someone who would be on a list of Republicans with a quote-unquote complicated relationship with former President Trump. As you know, and as I know, she served as UN ambassador in his administration, but also said Trump, quote, let us down after January 6th. Those are her words, not mine. What do you think her prospects are and the likelihood she might, in fact, throw her hat into the ring?
Yeah, it seems that a lot of potential candidates are going to throw their hat into the ring and not worry about the wrath of Trump. I see, a pretty full field, actually. I think, we'll see if she can get momentum. She's out there campaigning for House and Senate candidates now. Her profile as governor of South Carolina is one that was very good, and she's an attractive candidate in a lot of ways. She's got the foreign policy chops. She can lean in on that. We've obviously got a mess around the world. We'll just see if she actually does it. I think the most interesting person, I think there are three names. Obviously, there's Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump, and if Chris Christie gets in. I think if Christie gets in, I don't know that what his chances are. We'll have to see. But if he gets on a debate stage with Donald Trump, his friend, and he goes after him like he did with Marco Rubio in 2016, I think that could really complicate things. And Ron DeSantis is polling really well right now. He's polling above Trump in New Hampshire. So I'm sure he's looking at that.
So, Kevin, you said you think a lot of Republicans are going to jump in. Do you detect that something has happened with these very internal calculations, both in terms of what former President Trump and his wrath might or might not be in a presidential run, or what other Republicans who write checks, who would back Republicans not named Trump, have changed in their thinking about this, let's just say in the last 60 or 90 days?
Yeah, and he's got this strong base of support, but you see cracks in it, and you see a hunger to get beyond a candidate who might only be focused on his own 2020 race. And that's not where the majority of Republicans are in this country right now, with inflation out of control and, gas and groceries you can't buy and, shortages everywhere, foreign policy messes around the world. A successful candidate this run is going to have to talk about the current day issues. People's lives are getting worse by the day, and they're going to have to address that. And if you have a candidate who's focused on himself and 2020, that's not an attractive message. He had a better message in 2016. That's why he beat Hillary Clinton. He was change, and she was old and he was new, and it won. 2020 was different, but he can't be focused on that. And if he can't get beyond that, I think the party moves beyond him.
Joel, Kevin has said, for the purposes of our conversation, the magic two words, Hillary Clinton. So after Roe versus Wade was overturned, as she predicted, there is a report today of a possible third bid by Hillary Clinton to be the next president of the United States. Possibilities there, or kind of rehashing a story that simply, for better or worse, won't go away?
Yeah, I doubt that. And look, as you know, Major, I worked for Hillary Clinton in 2016. I actually considered it to be one of my career highlights to help that woman try to break that glass ceiling. I don't believe that she's likely to run. I think anyone, we're having an interesting conversation here about a number of people who are thinking about running, who are already running, et cetera. And as with anything, I just think you have to have a rationale and a reason why the country needs you, why the moment calls on you and your unique brand of leadership. And so whenever I kind of hear people's names speculated, and look, there are many talented people on both sides of the aisle in politics. What's your rationale? What's your case for running? If you can answer that, go for it. If you can't answer that question, you're going to have a hard time getting past the first cornfield in Iowa or the first snowstorm in New Hampshire. So as long as there's a rationale, I'm all for it. I don't know if there's a rationale for Hillary Clinton to run when there is a Democratic president in office and there's a deep bench of Democrats who could potentially succeed him, who stand right behind him.
So, Kevin, as you well know, and as the nation has been digesting for months upon months, President Biden's approval ratings right around the mid to low 40s. And he struggled to get traction on lots of issues. Now there's a razor-thin majority in the Senate, it's a pretty narrow majority in the House. And Republicans, because this is what the opposition party does, heap criticism on them. But do Republicans, from your vantage point, need to have something that they're actually for in the midterms, or is no, heck no, enough?
Yeah, it's a target-rich environment, so they need to hone their message and stick to the biggest issues that are affecting everybody, and that's inflation. That's they've got to get in there with a strong energy plan to drill more, to open up the federal leases, to build more nuclear capacity. They've got to do all of it because energy is crushing this country right now, and the lack of it. And they need to focus on inflation. They need to focus on holding this administration accountable. I think a true wave is coming, and I think everybody can kind of feel it. And when a real true wave hits, it takes out, candidates that you'd never think would lose. And we saw that in '94, and we've seen it over and over again. And we'll see. But it really feels like one of those years where it's going to be a really big wave.
So, Kevin, I'm glad you said that because it opens the door for me to put you on the spot. Define the magnitude of a wave. Give me a number. Is it 30 plus? And throw out at least one name that you think, God, you just said it. We would never think about that, but you think someone who could be jeopardized by a wave of significant magnitude.
I mean, I've always been I'm on the higher side. I think we're looking at 50 or plus seats in the House.
50 or more House seats.
Yeah, I think the Senate will flip, even though we're doing everything we can to kind of screw up our nominees there. I think you'll see Republican governors do really, really well. I don't know if I have a name, but we've seen it in the biggest wave years. You see leadership get knocked out. You see somebody, maybe it's not Pelosi because that's a tough district for any Republican to seriously win, but you saw it in New Jersey. Phil Murphy barely won, and the Senate leader lost. And when do you see that in New Jersey? So somebody's going down. It's somebody probably high up in leadership that we would never even think had a race.
All right, Joel, that's a big one over the home plate for you. I want you to take a swing at it and tell the audience why Kevin is hyper optimistic.
Well, look, Kevin and I come from the same, we're from the same fraternity of former Hill staffers, so I'll be kind to him. I would be more than happy if he and his Republican colleagues thought that 50 was the target. Look, that would certainly be a wave. I think looking at redistricting, looking at the nature of politics right now, I think that number is dwindling by the day. I think the House is pretty much settled. Republicans are very likely going to take over the House. I think the Senate is where it gets interesting because you know what, Major? This reminds me of 2010. And I was in Majority Leader Harry Reid's office in 2010. Republicans had an opportunity. They had some public support behind them with the Tea Party movement, and they had bad candidates all over the country. And I see bad candidates in the Senate all over the country for Republicans. I would not want to be running as a Republican with people like Herschel Walker, the things that he's saying in an environment in Georgia where you've got a strong Republican governor. And I think he might drag Republicans down in that state. Other places around the country where Republicans are not looking as strong as they should because these Trump influence-inspired candidates are dragging the power of the Republican brand down at a time where the wind's at their back. So look, I'm certainly not bullish as a Democrat with a bad economy and a glaze hanging over the American people right now of negativity. But I will say Republican extremism is our best friend right now. Republicans from the Supreme Court all the way down to dog catcher candidates for office, their extremism is the best friend of a Democrat that's running for office right now.
Kevin, you alluded to it, but I just want to give you a chance to respond. You said that you Republicans might be messing things up on the Senate side. Joel just described what he sees. I know you don't see it exactly that way, but what did you mean by that?
Well, Joel hinted at it. Yeah, we got some tough candidates. We'll see if they can overcome some of their more controversial, statements, some of the positions they've taken, their backgrounds. We'll see if it's that friendly of an environment, or if people who've leaned in on January 6th too much, or said the election was stolen in 2020. those candidates might get swept in. And so I know Democrats are putting a lot of money behind trying to get the most beatable candidate in their minds. But some of those guys might actually get swept in. So be careful what you wish for. And we'll see. It's a big wave coming, though.
Very good. Joel Payne, Kevin Sheridan, thanks for your time. Israel's parliament voted to dissolve itself Thursday after the coalition government, fragile even by Israeli standards, collapsed. Voters will now head to the polls for the 5th time in under 4 years. The coalition dissolved after a little over a year after it's formed. And it brought together, this is why it was fragile, 8 parties from across Israel's political spectrum. In so doing, it ousted longtime Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The country's foreign minister, Yair Lapid, will now take over as a so-called caretaker prime minister. New elections, well, they're set for November. And it is likely that Lapid and Netanyahu will emerge as frontrunners to be the country's next prime minister. One of 4 men charged with abandoning a tractor-trailer full of migrants and leaving them to die in the hot Texas sun made his first appearance in court today. Omar Villafranca has the latest.
Mexican authorities say this is 45-year-old Homero Zamorano behind the wheel of a tractor-trailer that crossed through an immigration checkpoint earlier this week. Authorities arrested him in a field near the tractor-trailer after finding 67 people inside in triple-digit San Antonio heat. A Mexican immigration official says Zamorano tried to slip away by pretending to be one of the survivors. At least 53 migrants died. Families from Central America are now getting word of the deaths of their loved ones, including 13-year-old cousins Wilmer Tulul and Pascual Melvin Guajiac from Guatemala. Tulul's father says he begged him not to go, but he says his son insisted because he wanted a better life. The mother of deceased migrants Alejandro and Fernando Andino Caballero and mother-in-law of Margie Tamara says there are no opportunities for young people in Honduras. Despite their education, she says, doors were closed for them. In Mexico, Virgilia Lopez says her son Javier Flores is missing. He was traveling with her nephew, who survived the sweltering truck and is now in a San Antonio hospital. The county medical examiner's office is still working to identify the migrants, many who came without identification.
We need to confirm with these countries, their consulates and embassies, are these the people? And we need to wait to hear back from them. Once we have that confirmation, we can then conclusively say, yes, this is the person.
This was the deadliest human smuggling event in U.S. history. Omar Villafranca, CBS News, San Antonio.
After making several promises to Ukraine, NATO is moving forward with delivering on them. The latest on that and the bid from 2 countries to join the defensive alliance. You are streaming Red and Blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year. I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow!
Big rewards.
There's gold in them there hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view. Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
This week on 60 Minutes.
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 minutes, 60 minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
Russian forces have fled a Ukrainian outpost known as Snake Island. The Black Sea island drew global attention at the beginning of the war when Ukrainian fighters refused to surrender it to a Russian warship. Russian officials say the troops left the outpost Thursday as a gesture of goodwill to show that Moscow will not interfere with UN efforts to export Ukrainian grain. But Kyiv is claiming the withdrawal as a victory, saying Ukrainian forces drove Russian soldiers out with heavy artillery strikes. Several world leaders are vowing to take action to continue to support Ukraine following a 3-day NATO summit in Spain. On Thursday, President Biden announced plans to send an additional $800 million in security assistance to Ukraine. Earlier in the week, the U.S. pledged to increase its military presence in Europe, including its first permanent base in Poland. And in a historic move, NATO leaders reached a deal Tuesday to expand membership to Sweden and Finland. The agreement addressed concerns voiced earlier by Turkey over the previously neutral nations joining this defensive military alliance. Russian President Vladimir Putin said Wednesday that his forces will respond if NATO deploys soldiers and/or military infrastructure to the Nordic countries. Joining me with more is CBS News correspondent Christina Ruffini. So, Christina, these summits can be, for those of us who have been lucky enough to cover them, diplomatic boondoggles, but this one seems slightly different and it actually produced results, especially the NATO summit. What happened?
Yeah, there seems to have been a couple deliverables out of this summit, which, as you know, is pretty rare. Mostly it's a lot of talking, a lot of photos, and a lot of we're going tos. This time they actually did a few things. First of all, the alliance added 2 new members. It added 2 Nordic countries, which was a big deal and was exactly the opposite of what Vladimir Putin said he wanted, right? He wanted less NATO and said he's getting more NATO. They also revised their mission statement in which they identified Russia as the biggest threat to Europe and the NATO alliance. And they singled out this budding relationship between China and Russia, saying that it also posed a threat. Furthermore, all of the countries agreed to beef up their security footing. They're essentially going back to Cold War footing. They're staffing up with missile systems, with boats. The U.S. is putting 300,000 troops on high alert over the next couple months, getting ready to fight if and when they need to. And this is something for an alliance that had kind of lost its way in the last century. There wasn't too long ago that President Macron of France called NATO brain dead. That's certainly not what we're seeing. All these countries not only got on the same page, they actually managed to deliver some results out of these summits in Europe this week.
And to your point, Christina, when Vladimir Putin launched the invasion into Ukraine, he said he wanted NATO back away from that and basically let this go on. NATO has fortified itself and is now not only fortifying what it was, it's gotten larger. But it got larger in part because a rift that was running for a while, and I know you and I both thought it would eventually be worked out, between Turkey, a NATO member, and Sweden and Finland. Well, Sweden and Finland are now on board. Turkey's agreed. How did that get worked out?
Well, so first, these Nordic countries met with President Erdogan of Turkey, and he said they've agreed to do what he wanted. He says he wants them to prosecute and deliver these 70-some-odd individuals that Turkey considers terrorists. He wanted them to crack down on what Turkey refers to as Kurdish terrorists. The countries say they've agreed to do that. Now, at his press conference, President Biden was asked if there was any kind of quid pro quo for Turkey to kind of get in line with the rest of the alliance, and he said no. However, all of a sudden, the U.S. is being much more receptive to Turkey's request that they sell the NATO ally F-16s to help revitalize their air fleet. All of a sudden, the U.S. is openly supportive of that transaction, whereas they've been previously kind of not said anything, and Erdogan had actually accused Washington of dragging its feet. Again, the two are completely separate. The U.S. says they were negotiating that transaction, parallel to this, but all of a sudden that seems to be moving a little forward.
So we will file that under indirect quid pro quo. Did the leaders come up with a plan for how to support Ukraine through the duration of what now seems, Christina, to everyone looking at this closely, a conflict that not only can but probably will drag on for many months to come?
So that's the one deliverable, and one would argue a really important deliverable, that they didn't get worked out. There seems to be no plan as to how to bring this conflict to any kind of resolution. The U.S. has said multiple times it takes two to tango, and we've not seen a modicum of effort from Moscow to try to negotiate, to try to resolve this, to try to pull back. The problem is the U.S. just announced, President Biden just announced $800 billion more worth of military assistance. All the countries at these alliances are saying, yes, we're going to keep supporting Ukraine indefinitely, but indefinitely is a really long, really expensive time, especially when most of these nations are looking down the barrel at a possible recession. Gas prices are high. That, limitless military spending to a country your citizens don't live in tends to get harder and harder to justify at the ballot box. So for now, the alliances seem to be united. They seem to be fully behind Ukraine, but they still haven't figured out a way to end this conflict, and they haven't figured out a way to kind of change the stakes and get it to move. Otherwise, I think we're going to be looking at this for quite a while.
Christina Ruffini, as always, we thank you.
Thanks, Major.
We are going to take a quick break, which means you have a couple of minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. There is a whole mountain of content there for you to stream. Not just your favorite shows and movies, but there's sports as well.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in crypto last year. I have no idea how much money I have made over the past year. That's like, wow.
Big rewards.
There's gold in them, there hills, as they say.
Bigger risks.
The market's down, but it's gonna bounce back. It's crypto.
Is it a gold rush or fool's gold?
It's our metaverse, our story. Peace out, y'all.
An original documentary from CBS Reports. Stream now.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail. We experience the weather in a whole new way.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
This week on 60 Minutes.
That's incredible.
The 60 Minutes.
60 Minutes. 60 Minutes.
Are you ready for some tough questions?
Let me ask you this.
You know how this sounds.
What's your response to that?
60 Minutes Sundays on CBS.
As June and Pride Month come to an end, we're taking a close look at the tremendous strides the LGBTQ+ community has made throughout our country's history. CBS News digital journalist Miguel Amaya takes us to a museum in Florida that is preserving the stories of the past generations for the future.
Inside the rolling shelves of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, every box filled with one-of-a-kind artifacts preserves a chapter of LGBTQ history.
This is from the Broadway musical, Kinky Boots, and it's hard to see, but it was signed by Billy Porter.
From books to textiles, the museum, established in 1972, is home to what's considered one of the largest LGBTQ archives in the country.
What we offer is that foundational history lesson that makes history come alive, and it's on the walls, and it's on the shelves, and it's in the archives, that just prove what history was made when people took to the streets in the fight against AIDS, in the fight for marriage.
Through carefully curated exhibits led by its executive director, Robert Keaston, the museum has managed to continue the legacy of its founder, Mark Silber, for half a century, educating the public, all amid the increasing anti-LGBTQ rhetoric being witnessed across the country.
There are a lot of places that are still not sympathetic to people who are different, and having all of this collected and showing the cultural impact that this group of people have had really send shockwaves in places where you're supposed to be a bad person, or you're supposed to be against God, or you're supposed to be all the things that successful people aren't supposed to be.
What's your message to not only people in the LGBTQ community, but in general, of what this place represents?
What this place represents to me is the chance for everybody to realize the American dream, to believe and to feel comfortable with the fact that we live in a land where everybody is free and equal, and justice is for everyone, not for a select few.
A safe space where the story of past generations is preserved and the story of future generations enlightened. Miguel Amaya, CBS News, Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It's gonna be big!
The metaverse, the virtual world that's become a cryptocurrency casino.
It's like buying property on Mars.
Do they get an actual picture of this? No, it's a digital copy. Why would they pay for that?
Making millionaires almost overnight.
We made more than $1 million in